want to have some fun talking about labor, you put my two next guests together. Bob Metz is the president of Freedom Party, and Gil Warren is the president of the London District Labour Council. We've seen them do battle many times on our radio program, Talk of the Town, and 1290 CJBK, and I appreciate both you guys coming here tonight. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the future of organized labor in Canada. We know that it's under attack from a number of directions. We hear that that membership is shrinking. We hear that adherence to the party line is shrinking, that the alliance, the perceived alliance, Gil, that many people had between organized labor and the NDP no longer seems to be there. Bob, we know from the right that a lot of people believe organized labor's time has come and gone, that they've performed whatever useful function it was they were supposed to perform, and now their usefulness is fading with time. And we also know that for every person who believes one side of that story, somebody else believes the other one. I want to start with you, Bob, and ask you what you see as the future for organized labor in this country. What purpose do you see it serving in the next 5, 10, 15 years?
Well, it's curious you're saying just organized labor, because when I think of labor, I think of the average working guy who's not part of an organized union group. But what unions have traditionally done is monopolize their labor, and that has been their primary function in the marketplace. And you say they're under attack from external forces now. Well, it's basically the marketplace and competing labor that is making it difficult for organized labor to maintain its high wages, since, you know, you've heard that expression, pricing themselves out of the marketplace because of the fact of having that protected marketplace, in the sense of where a union can prevent other people from taking a person's job if they're on strike, which is really what they're striking against, particularly when they want higher wages. They're striking against the guy that's willing to work for a little bit less.
Gil, is that what's happened? Is it about protected work area?
No, I think that you have to see that the labor movement is a movement. It goes up and down. And you can look back in labor history for 200 years and see periods where it's very active and then periods where it becomes less active. And I think that we are now actually headed into a phase where labor is becoming more active. In fact, the labor participation rate, the union rate in the United States is increasing, and our numbers are not decreasing. The labor movement in Canada is sort of leveled off in terms of numbers.
What, about 30% now?
Yes, right. And whereas in the States it dropped down to like 8 or 10%. So there were different political dynamics going on in the States and Canada, but both labor movements are now growing. And so I feel that that part of it is that the labor movement's coming back. The other part of it is that we've had right-wing governments in power now for 20 years pushing monetarist ideas, and part of that is the policy of high interest rates and making sure that the economy is not going at full blast, which means a labor pool, which means competition amongst workers in terms of finding work. And so labor is always stronger when there's a strong labor market and when there's a prosperous economy. So if we had lower interest rates over the last 20 years, there would have been more employment. And
so you're saying that these governments have been holding the economy back?
Yes, yes. With high interest rates.
Well, he's also saying that the right wing supports that. I don't know who he's including in that, but I'm not in that group there. But you know, Gil, you talk about the labor movement moving up and down, but you have to admit it's a political movement. It's not really a movement in the marketplace. It's more of a political movement, and it's aided and abetted by the political process. If you didn't have the legal right that is given to a union by law to withhold your labor from an employer, who therefore cannot go out somewhere else and hire another employer, unions would have no power. All of their power comes from their political force.
He can go somewhere else. He can take his plant somewhere else. Why aren't they doing that? If that's the problem, why aren't we seeing more Canadian plants leave?
Because Canadian plants are still productive. I'm just saying it's not the union that's making them so. It's the investment of capital that's making that. That's why we live in a capitalist society. It's capital that makes a person in labor productive so that he can be afforded the wage that he gets.
There are a lot of other reasons why factories are here in Canada. It's low electricity costs, raw materials, skilled workforce. I mean, it's a big mix in terms of what keeps factories here and what doesn't keep factories here. But workers in this country have not done as well in the last few years, like in the last 10 years even, as they did in, say, the 60s and 70s in terms of keeping up with the rate of inflation and that sort of thing. And part of that is because there's been high unemployment. If we were to have lower unemployment, then the labor movement would have a lot more power.
How do we get lower unemployment?
Well, I would say with lower interest rates, and we're actually going towards that right now.
What do lower interest rates do for us?
Stimulate the economy.
To do what? Stimulate you to buy a new refrigerator and you to buy a new TV?
New car, a new house, you know. It benefits everybody. A lower interest rate policy benefits the workers, it benefits business as well.
But we've had interest rates sinking for the last how many years? 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Personally, I think the best thing that the worker, unionized and non-unionized, would have in his favor is lower taxes right across the board. Lower taxes can do the same thing that Gil suggests lower interest rates can do, and that's putting more money in the pockets of the consumer so they can spend. The important thing is to keep money in the pockets of the producer, the person who is investing in the capital that makes labor productive in the marketplace.
What's wrong with that?
So that you can actually compete.
What's wrong with that?
I think that what we have to look at, rather than lowering taxes to stimulate the economy, is the lower interest rates, number one. Number two, having more money flow to workers rather than to the wealthy, and to get money into the pockets.
What do you think lower taxes is?
That's lower taxes for the wealthy, by and large, and that's the problem. But if you had money in the pockets of workers, they are going to spend it on basics like housing and education.
Let's say, for sake of argument, though, that it is lower taxes for workers. What's wrong with that?
But I think that
can't we do that?
We could do that to some extent, all right. But I don't think that it's an efficient way to stimulate the economy. I think that we're going now into what looks like a serious recession, although it's hard to say.
You wouldn't rather have more money in your own pocket, though?
I would rather have the government, for instance, building social housing. That's what I think needs to be done.
Rather than the private market building social housing.
Private market is not going to build social housing.
This is interesting to me. We talked about social housing last night, but this is interesting to me because you're talking about organized workers, most of whom don't need subsidized housing.
I disagree there. You know, you have the image that every worker is a middle-class person who makes $20 an hour. There's a lot of workers who are organized in unions who are making the average industrial wage is like $12 or $13. Many people are making $7 or $8 an hour. I mean, not all workers are middle class. Many are relatively poor.
Well, if the idea is for the workers of the world to unite, why don't the wealthy workers help the poor workers and leave the rest of the taxpayers out of it?
Why don't we bring the poor workers up to the middle class workers?
Who's going to pay for it?
I would argue that...
who is going to pay for it?
That if we have a redistribution of wealth, and so that there's less money...
By whom, from whom, to whom?
Less money in the hands of the super capitalists and more money in the hands of average people.
How are you going to do that?
That the whole economy would benefit.
Like, who's going to get...
Well, we've seen evidence that...
I always get nervous about this, you know, because I make more money now than I used to make, and I don't know if I'm a rich guy yet or not.
Nah, you're probably still middle class.
I'm worried about you putting your hand in my pocket here. How deep is it going to go?
I think we have to look at the big picture, and we have to look at the fact that working people need to be able to have a decent standard of living. And it's declined in the last 10 years.
Here you are advocating bigger government, more government spending, and you're really reluctant to say anything about lower taxes, and yet you purport to support working people. I don't understand it, Gil. It's a completely opposite agenda you have for working people.
Because I argue for fair taxes, so I argue for a tax system that is more progressive than regressive, one that taxes the wealthier more and taxes the average working person less. But everyone's
Why? Why would you want that? Why doesn't everyone just pay a flat rate, and then the people who make $100,000, say for example, pay $10,000 in taxes, and the guy who pays $10,000 only pays $1,000 in taxes? The guy who makes $100,000 income, or $1 million is the one I'm more focused on, has been able to benefit from our society and take more out, and so he has an obligation to put more back in again. Well, is it true that society has benefited from him because he earned his money voluntarily, we bought his product, and that's why he became rich, because he benefited us? So what you're saying is, for doing something good for us, we should punish you and fine you for doing good.
I think it's a matter of emphasis and values, and what I argue is, and I'm not arguing for great state enterprises doing things. In fact, I'm arguing for community economic development, and I'm arguing for worker co-ops and housing co-ops. And
why don't the workers do that now?
Because it's very difficult to get the capital to get started, and it's very difficult to get...
And the minute you get the capital, you're not a worker in his definition anymore. You become an ultra-capitalist, and you're evil.
No, there's a difference between collective capital and individual capital.
So you like corporations as opposed to an individual owner, then?
What I like is to see community economic development. I think that's a whole different...
Well, that's corporate.
No, it's not. No, community economic development is getting the community to be involved in economic development.
Well, Bob, what's wrong with trying to mobilize communities to help themselves? What's wrong with that?
Nothing at all, but I know that when Gil uses the word community, he really means government. He means sticking his hand in your pocket.
No, I don't.
Well, then I don't have any objection to it. So why are you using the word community, and why do you have objections to rich people? They're part of the community. The capitalist is part of the community. The corporation is part of the community. But you want to always cut them out of the community.
Often they're not part of the community. They're foreigners from some other country who brought in their capital. What I'm arguing is for local people.
Well, what does that mean? That's great. That's great.
But there's this myth out there that the left is big and it's for a big state and it's for big government. But the left today is different than what it was, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
How so? What's the chief difference?
Well, one of the problems was that there were many people on the left who just focused on taxes and getting the money and then spending money on health or education, schools, hospitals. And what's happened now is many, and they didn't pay attention to economics or business or the community or co-ops. Many people now are focusing on how can a community keep the money in that community, and how can we have reinvestment that stays in the community, and how can we do it collectively instead of individually?
How do you do that if you're going to take the money away from
why
rich
would you
people?
want to is a big question.
I'm still stuck.
It's not just taking it from the rich. It's about the community developing its own wealth. So having things like credit unions. Like in London, we have a credit union that has like about $700 million in assets. It's a very large credit union.
Gil, wealth comes from production.
Yes, it does.
That's all that matters. Don't worry about wealth. Production is what matters. And what you need to do is eliminate barriers to production. Get rid of regulations that make it hard for an investor to get his money to where he wants to produce something.
Why do you disagree? Why do we want barriers in the way
he wants political power.
People investing in exactly what you're talking about? Isn't it making our communities better?
It's not a situation.
If you need money for this community development and an investor comes along and says, I've got some money for you, where's the problem there?
Well, he's going to want a high rate of return.
Well, he's going to want a rate of return.
Yeah. But one of the principles of community economic development is maybe instead of taking a 15 or 20% return, you take 5% or you take 2%. Like it's local community investors.
So you think that somebody's going to invest their money over here where you're offering 2% when Jim over here is offering 10%. So I've got this money, I'm going to give it to you. Well, it's going to be socially useful giving it to Jim at 10% too. But probably more so because the difference, the 8%, tells me how much more socially useful it actually is. It actually can be measured.
Arbitrary.
Why?
That's the only non-arbitrary thing in the whole equation. Everything you said is very arbitrary.
I've been involved in community economic development and worker co-ops and setting up worker co-ops. And there are people who are willing to take less of a profit in return to help the community.
But isn't that great?
It is.
That's great.
Yeah,
so why don't you keep doing that?
Well, we are.
Are you running out of people?
We are, but we need assistance from the government in terms of access to capital.
Back to the community being government.
No, it's not. No, it's saying that
you just said we need assistance from the government, and then you say in the next sentence, no, you're not asking for assistance from government.
We ask for assistance in terms of access to pools of capital.
But if this is such a good idea, if this is such a good idea,
done around the world. It's been done a lot in Europe, in Italy, and France.
I won't dispute that. I'm the guy trying to learn here. I'm trying to learn here from both you guys. Here's what I want to know, though. If this is such a good idea, why are you running out of people to do it? Why do you have to go to the government? If it's a good idea for the community.
Because most people don't have a lot of extra cash floating around to invest, right? I mean, that's one of the problems. For the average working person, he's having a difficult time paying the mortgage and paying the car payments, right? I mean,
but all investment cash is extra cash. That's why it's called capital. Capital is cash over and above one's necessity. So that when you're looking for capital, you have no choice but to go to people who have capital, and those are people who are richer than most of us.
But that's part, see, there's the problem. That's part of the problem with the system, is that ordinary people need to be able to access capital, and government can assist in that way. It doesn't mean that the government owns the corporation or anything. It means they might even just guarantee a loan, and the loan might be through the private sector.
What's wrong with that?
Because when the government is doing it, it's using force. It's taking money from somewhere where it would have been and moving it somewhere else.
It's already got the money.
Well, but that's what's wrong with it. Every dollar taken away from you by force devalues that dollar and devalues the remaining dollars you have in your pocket.
It's not taken by force.
Even if it does,
sure it is. If you don't hand it over to well, then it's mitigated by that amount. But you will never do as much good through government as you will through private effort. And we know that in business, we know it in charity, we know it in every single possible application of every economic
So you guys
theory.
are all agreed then everything's okay?
No, we always disagree.
I have a feeling we're going to have to take this one up again on a succeeding edition of Jim Chapman Live. I want to thank my guests Bob Metz and Gil Warren for coming in tonight.
Happy to be
here. And we will extend that invitation to you. We'll come back because there's lots more to talk about here. Stay with us. Fireways coming your way. Telephone number should be on your screen. If you've got a question or a comment about something you've heard tonight, or indeed anything that's going on in the world around us, you want to have your say, that's where you do it right here on Jim Chapman Live on Rogers Television.